This isn't everything that's wrong with the book, but it's what we're going to discuss. This is the book, like no other. That's my sister Khani.
And I'm Aliza. This is a book like Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story about a West Indian boy, Jackson, and a Chabad girl, Devorah, who fall in love in Brooklyn, New York, and their families aren't too thrilled about it. Say, Khani, what's Chabad?
Chabad is a type of Orthodox Judaism.
Thanks. One thing in particular that annoyed me about the book was that the author kept referring to Chabad as a faith. Judaism is the faith. Chabad is a way of being Jewish. One of Chabad's main goals is to introduce Jews to their heritage. That's why they're all over the world. Wherever a Jew can be, that's where they are.
And they also tend to be very approachable and very accessible because of that.
To strangers, Jews and non-Jews alike.
Contrary to the impression that you get from the book.
Exactly. She shows them as being very insular and rude to strangers, and that's just the complete opposite of what Chabad is. Like I said at the beginning, there's a ton wrong with the book. We are not going through everything because that would take way too long, but we will go through a lot of it. We've categorized the problems into 7, I think,
8
categories. Maybe 8.
The categories are
Ba-da-da-dum.
Number 1, Chabad, Jews and non-Jews. Number 2, race. Number 3, love, dating, and marriage. Number 4, yichud, shomer negia, and sneak. Number 5, rabbis and religious guys in general. Number 6, sin, evil, and free will. Number 7, Shabbos. And number 8 are just miscellaneous extra stuff.
All right, so without further ado, let's get started. Let's start with this place where Devorah discusses what she calls her grandmother, which is not Bubby, which is what a lot of Jewish people call their grandmothers. Instead, she calls her grandmother Grandma. She says, maybe we call her this because she converted from being a regular Jew to Chabad when she was 18, making her a Baal Tshuva, or one who has returned. Now, first of all, there's no such thing as a regular Jew. Each one of us is a unique flower. Second of all, there's no such thing as converting from being one kind of Jew to another. If you're born Jewish, you're Jewish, and that's the end of it. You can't really escape the fate.
You can choose to become religious, or you can choose to become not religious, but either way, you remain a Jew. Here, Devorah mentions her grandmother again. She says, Chabad is the only Hasidic sect that embraces proselytizing, which in a way is the only reason I exist, since my grandma was allowed to convert. Now, as you said before, her grandma didn't convert because she was Jewish to begin with. That aside, Chabad does not proselytize. Chabad does outreach to people who are already Jewish.
Judaism believes that not everyone needs to be Jewish. In fact, non-Jews can and do receive spiritual merit in the world to come. This next part is from Jackson's point of view. Jackson's talking about how he often sees Hasidim, and he says he sees them running around, etc., etc., but if the kids get too close to us, their mothers would swoop in, ushering them away with whispers in another language.
And the camera cut out at this point, and a number of points along the way. But with regard to the specific part, A, in Crown Heights, they primarily speak English and not another language. By another language, the author means Yiddish, which is the cultural language of a lot of Jews. And B, I'm not sure why the author presents the adults swooping in to protect the kids as so strange. This is New York City, after all, and there are a lot of bad people out there and weirdos, and you don't want your kids associating with people that you don't know. So, yes, adults swoop in to save their kids all over New York City.
Devorah's brother-in-law, Jacob, who we'll talk about later, is speaking about his wife's doctor. He says, why should we trust that doctor? She's not our doctor. I can tell he means she's not one of us, not a Chabadnik. Translation, not to be trusted.
Not true.
Like any normal person, people who are Chabad go to doctors that have good credentials and that they trust, whether or not they're Jewish.
Not based on their religion. Again, and also not based on whether they're Chabad or a different kind of Jewish.
Right. Jackson is speaking to his parents about why he sees people who are Chabad speaking to other people about Judaism.
And why they don't approach him.
Well, his sister asks, why don't they ever ask us? And my father just said, we're the wrong color. Now, color doesn't come into it because, as we said earlier, it's about Jews versus not being Jewish. It has nothing to do with color. You have Jews from all over the world who come in all shapes and sizes. Chinese, Indian, black, white, it doesn't matter. It's a question of, again, they don't proselytize, they don't missionize to non-Jews because they don't think that that's necessary.
So they're only approaching people. In fact, they approach people and they say, "Are you Jewish?"
Right.
Because if you are, here's something you can do. Devorah, in reference to her mother, says, quote, "Her own mother came late to the faith, a blonde, blue-eyed Baal Tshuva." Blonde, blue-eyed, I mean, like we said, Jews come in all colors, so it's not only skin color, but hair color and eye color as well.
Shocker.
Our grandmothers are both blue-eyed and blonde-haired. We know numerous people with different colored hair. I have green eyes. She has, I'm not sure what color hair.
It's none of the above, and I don't feel excluded.
Devorah's big concern throughout the book is that she's going to be forced to be married when she turns 18.
There's no reason for her to be concerned about this because Judaism does not believe in forced marriage.
And in our communities, it's not a thing to be married that young.
Devorah says, it's not at all uncommon for Lubavitch girls to be married and have babies at 18. So it is.
This next bit has to do with love before marriage. Devorah's family is sitting around the table, eating and talking, and they're discussing marriage.
Devorah's brother-in-law Jacob says it's not just unrealistic to fall in love before marriage, it's destructive to our faith.
Actually, when people would come to the leading rabbi of Chabad and ask him whether or not they should get married to a specific person, he would tell them that they should follow their heart. And it's not enough to just have shared values, but that they should marry someone that they love.
And Jacob continues, love is not romantic. Love is earned through virtue. Now, Judaism is very big on romantic love and passionate love, so this is once again something that's just not right.
Throughout the book, Devorah expects to find her future husband through a process called a basho.
A basho is a way to have express dating, where the guy and the girl meet in someone's home. They talk for hours, see if they feel comfortable with one another, if they feel chemistry, and if they're interested in going on to the next stage of life together.
However, Chabad is not one of those sects that does bashos.
Beyond that, when Devorah is talking to the guys she's forcibly set up with, he says to her, "I've never met any Chabad girl who's against shidduchim." And she says, "I guess I just think people should choose their lives for themselves." He responds, "We do choose." And she says, "You choose, maybe. Girls don't have that freedom."
There's no difference between guys and girls when it comes to the dating process. They only continue if they're both interested in continuing. If either party is not interested in continuing, then they don't continue. The same as with any healthy relationship.
Here again we get to a part where Devorah is worrying about her future marriage. Devorah says, "I try to imagine what it will feel like to share my bed with a strange man. Will I be able to choose when I want to touch him, or will I be at the mercy of his urges?" First of all, he's not a strange man. This is the guy that she chose to marry. This is the guy that she's in love with.
Second of all, the author is uninformed about Jewish law when it comes to marriage. It's about making both of them happy, and if anything, is the husband's obligation to please his wife, not the other way around.
When mentioning her older sister, Devorah says, "She was never meek until she met Jacob, her husband. Now sometimes I sit and watch them, him with his stern looks, her with her head bowed reverently, and wish I could speak up for her." Okay, most of the Jewish women I know are quite outspoken. In a Jewish relationship, the man and the woman have equal say in their partnership. It's a partnership, essentially.
Yichud is a concept that the author brings up throughout the book to an extent that is unheard of in day-to-day life for Orthodox Jews. Yichud means that a man and a woman are alone in a locked room. Orthodox men and women try to avoid that to avoid getting into situations that they will later regret. Devorah and her brother-in-law are sitting in the waiting room in a hospital, and she says, "I know that the laws of Yichud mean that we wouldn't even be allowed to sit together talking if the cell phone girls and the janitor and the doctors and nurses weren't around to keep watch." Now, in the first place, the waiting room is a public space, and therefore the laws of Yichud don't apply. And the second, the laws of Yichud are not there so that other people are there to keep watch. It's not like you need what's it called?
A guard. It's just that for you to know for your own sake that you should act with propriety.
You act in a way that you would if you would expect somebody else to pop in at any second. That's why it's okay for man and woman to be alone in a room that's not locked, or that somebody's expected to come in at any given moment, because they know for themselves that to act in a way that would be okay if somebody else were around.
And again, she brings up Yichud when she's in the hospital elevator. Everyone leaves the elevator except Jackson, who she doesn't know yet, comes onto the elevator, and she's scared that she's violating Yichud by being in an elevator with him. which is utterly ridiculous. For someone who makes such a big deal about yichud, the author makes absolutely no mention of the concept of shomer negia, which is something that happens much more often in day-to-day life. It's essentially the idea that a guy and a girl who are not immediate family do not touch one another. Not all religious Jews observe shomer negia, and some people do it to different levels. They'll shake hands for business purposes, but they won't go in for a familiar hug.
Tzniut is translated as modesty. It does not mean what the author believes it to mean. It does not mean dowdiness, the way Dvorah describes my skirt, a lightweight summer wool that actually seemed pretty stylish when we bought it at Macy's in May, before my mother made the tailor on Troy Avenue let it out by 3 inches until it billowed around me like a hefty bag. Like a hefty bag? She obviously has never met a Chabad girl from Crown Heights.
They dress very well.
Yeah. The idea of modesty is just
that you're seen as a person before you're seen as a body. After Dvorah tries to run away with Jackson, she's sent to a kind of rehab center, which, by the way, does not exist. But anyway, there she meets a rabbi who's supposed to cure her. I'm expecting an old, creaky, roomy-eyed rabbi like the ones I'm used to at home. So when a slight, energetic man with a toothy grin, wireless glasses, and all his natural hair greets Chana and me at the door of P House, I'm momentarily taken aback. Now, there are young, energetic rabbis throughout all sects of Judaism, and especially Chabad.
And in Crown Heights.
They're all rabbis.
It's like,
they're not
it's like
rabbis,
the home of young, energetic rabbis.
Yeah.
Chabad tends to generally be energetic and fun and approachable.
Not to say that there aren't elderly rabbis, but they're
they
also
do get to that
rabbis of all
point.
ages. What happens in this scene is that Jacob accuses Dvorah of hiding a cell phone, which he's allowed to have but didn't have for personal reasons, and he thinks she's using it to communicate with her secret boyfriend, which she is, but don't tell anybody. Hand it over, Jacob says, holding out his hand, the thin, bony fingers flexing in anticipation. You can get the idea. He goes into her room, storms in, undoes her bed, looks into her top drawer, and rifles through her underwear. It's so grossed us out. This is not a thing that would happen at all. But from what we said, he keeps popping up. For some reason, she really liked using this character. But our problem is not only with him, it's the fact that he seems to symbolize the religious Jewish guy.
You can see that the author's problem is not just with Jacob, but with religious Jewish guys in general, by how Dvorah reacts to her forcible setup. Now, to start with, she was okay with him, and
she even found him cute.
Right. But then she suddenly changes her mind, and she says, I never wanted to marry him, but it still disappoints me that I was so wrong about David. He's no better than Jacob after all.
As if any Jewish religious guy would not be any better than Jacob. Essentially, that all Jewish religious guys are perverse jerks. And they're not.
They're not.
Out of all the classes that Dvorah could possibly be learning, she's learning about sin. Which, okay, Judaism does have sinning as part of the religion, but it places at least equal or more emphasis on doing good things as not doing bad things. With regard to Dvorah's grandmother, Dvorah says, I once heard Rabbi Pearl from our shul say that it's a serious offense to remind a repentant sinner of his or her evil deeds. And I guess the evil of not being observant until she was 18 years old extends to her family too. Alright, so first of all, we don't, just because you don't do something in the way of the Torah, it doesn't mean that it's evil. Evil is if you have malicious intent, to harm somebody. That's evil. That goes into, we don't call people sinners. If they have sinned, it's something they did, but it doesn't define who they are. The author here is taking something that's actually a beautiful thing and warping it into something negative. This idea of not reminding somebody of their past once they've returned and become observant is supposed to be because if they want to discuss it, that's their prerogative, but it's not up to you to remind someone in an underhanded way, oh, when you weren't religious, X, Y, and Z.
It may be something that they're sensitive about, and therefore you want to be sensitive to them and only bring it up if
they're okay with it. And to go back for just a minute to the class on sin that Dvorah had, the teacher discusses different levels of sin, and Dvorah is wondering what level of sin she's committing by thinking about Jackson all the time. Now, again, she's making it sound like, oh, look how many different kinds of sin you have, but in fact, it's actually something very kind that God has created. It's not just that you do something wrong, you're sinning, and that's it. There are different levels. The nuances between the different levels of sin is meant to benefit the sinner. Just like you have murder versus manslaughter. If someone sets out to kill somebody in cold blood, it's different than if they by mistake kill them in a car accident.
Devorah is speaking with her father, and she says she just wants to see what else is out there. I just want to feel more free. Free will is an illusion, my father barks. Because in this book, religious men bark. Free will is a core belief, a core Jewish belief. It's called Bechira, and it's why we have the Torah. The Torah is supposed to give us another option besides for just our natural instinct to, fill any appetite that just comes your way. You're given this alternative of doing it a different way.
To give you an example of what we mean, let's say you have a child who's been abused. Then all he knows is abuse. Will further probably abuse others. If you teach that child he could be nice, and he has the option to be nice, and being abusive is not the only way you can have a relationship with somebody, he then has the option in the future, do I want to be abusive or do I want to be nice? Now I know I'm making something very cookie cutter about a very complicated situation, but it's just an example. Shabbos or Shabbat is the Sabbath. It's the Jewish Sabbath that takes place on Saturday, Friday night and Saturday actually. It's a day of relaxation and connection to God and your fellow man. While it's a beautiful day, there's a lot of preparation that goes into it. Now, the author does not realize this because she has Devorah say, Fridays in preparation for Shabbos are normally peaceful days. Now, just like before any big holiday, because Shabbos is like a holiday you get every week, there's a lot of running around and getting things ready beforehand, and it's even more so for Shabbos because there's a lot of things that we don't do on Shabbos, such as cleaning or shopping, etc. So we have to make sure to do all those things before Shabbos, which, as you can imagine, is very hectic.
Devorah's sister has a baby, and her mother wants to look at a picture of the baby on her camera right before Shabbos. And Devorah's father says, it's almost sundown, Ayelet. But my mother dismisses him with a wave. Psst, she says, this is my granddaughter. Shabbos can wait.
Shabbos doesn't wait. First of all, it comes at sundown, Friday night, and that's not changing. And second of all, you want to bring Shabbos in. It's a sacred, holy day, and people actually try to bring Shabbos in earlier if they can. Here we have Devorah contemplating whether or not she should spend time with Jackson on Shabbos. She says, he doesn't realize that even if we spent the whole day praying in a pitch-black synagogue together, we would still be desecrating Shabbos just by virtue of the fact that we're together. You don't spend the whole day praying. You aren't in a pitch-black synagogue because we have lights, and they would not be desecrating the Shabbos by being together. There are about 39 laws that dictate what you're not supposed to do on Shabbos, and being in the presence of a non-Jew is not one of them.
Later on, Devorah says, back home, even though Shabbos meals are fun, the Sabbath itself has become a boring day of homework and cold lunch, bookended by 2 interminable temple services.
If she has a test she has to study for, she has to study regardless of if it's Shabbos or not. So that's that. Bookended by temple services. As a girl, she can pray at home or in the synagogue. She doesn't have to go, and there's more than just 2 services anyway.
And the cold lunch. Shabbos, like many things in Judaism, is about bringing the physical and the spiritual worlds together. So you do things on Shabbos like sing songs and eat warm meals and hang out with friends and that sort of thing.
We have a special dish called chalent, which is like a bean stew. It's a meat stew with beans and potatoes and all kinds of savory things. Now, I might have mentioned that we don't cook on Shabbos, but you set it up in a crock pot before Shabbos and it boils throughout the weekend.
That's how you fulfill the not cooking and also the warm meal thing.
And just to run through a few other miscellaneous things, there are these terms that she doesn't use properly. FFB, which is from birth, which she writes. She takes it to mean goody two-shoes. It actually means religious from birth, to differentiate from somebody who was not religious and became religious, or someone who was religious and became not religious and then decided to become religious again. That takes us to off the derech, which is another term she misuses. It literally means off the path, meaning the person became not religious anymore, off the religious path. but she takes it to mean someone who's rebellious. So if she's not listening to her mother, she's off the derech. It's not that easy.
Really.
It's not that easy to get off the derech. Another aspect of her life that Devorah hates is the fact that she
can't go to college. Now, actual Chabad girls who are interested do go for higher education.
Another misconception about Orthodox Judaism that the author shows through Devorah's eyes is that women are lesser than men. For instance, she discusses the length of time that a new mom has a certain status after she has a boy than after she has a girl. We'll put a link in the description box with an explanation as to that particular issue. But just in general, there are differences between men and women, but that doesn't make them unequal.
I think that's pretty much it. There are, of course, numerous other problems with the book. In fact, like every page that has talking about Devorah is probably something wrong with it. There were conversations that were just cringeworthy for us. We couldn't even read it to ourselves. We had to read it to each other because it just was so hard to get through. We're particularly frustrated because this is not a standalone book. I mean, obviously it is a standalone story, but this comes on the wave of movies and other books, media that doesn't get Orthodox Judaism correctly, and we're here to correct that impression. So if you have questions, ask away, and we'll try to answer. Also, of course, we understand that people aren't always happy with their upbringing, and that's fine if she wants to have a story about somebody who is upset about the way she was brought up. But firstly, get the facts right at least, and secondly, have some other character in the book that's not nasty. So, like I said, feel free to ask questions. This goes for people in Hollywood or in publishing that want to get, their work looked at by somebody who's actually in that world. Then feel free to contact us about that. We are available for that. So comment, like, consider subscribing, share the video, and thank you for watching.